My name is Diana, I'm 34 years old, and last month my husband, the man I built a life with, fired me from his company, in front of his mistress. The humiliation cut deep, but what he didn't know was that I held the one secret that could destroy everything he owned. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about betrayal, revenge, and emotional courage. The words are still sharp in my ears. You're done here, Diana. Pack your things. I remember standing in his office, my chest tightening like someone had dropped a weight on it. The man behind the desk wasn't just my husband. He was my boss, my partner in building a business we'd once dreamed of together. And now, in the blink of an eye, he had turned into a stranger, cold and cruel. What made the moment unbearable wasn't just his tone, it was the woman standing next to him. Her smile was small but smug, the kind that told me she had already won. I didn't need an explanation. My husband wasn't just firing me as his employee. He was replacing me as his wife. I felt the blood drain from my face. You can't be serious, I whispered, my voice shaky but steady enough to hold back the tears. He leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting his tie like he was handling a routine meeting. Diana, it's not personal. You've been distracted. The company needs someone focused. Emma will take your role from here. Emma. The name stung. The mistress I had long suspected but never confronted. Now she was here, not in the shadows, but bold and untouchable, wearing confidence like perfume. I glanced at her. She didn't flinch. She didn't even try to look away. Her eyes met mine, sharp and daring, as if daring me to fight. I didn't. Not in that moment. My dignity was all I had left, and I wasn't about to hand that to her. The office around us hummed with the quiet buzz of air conditioning, but it felt like a courtroom. His verdict was final. My sentence was humiliation. I picked up my purse from the chair beside me. My hands trembled, but I forced them to stay still. If this is how you want it, I said, my voice low, almost calm, then so be it. He didn't even respond. He just turned to Emma and smiled like she'd already proven herself worthy. My husband, the man I once trusted with my whole heart, had chosen his mistress not just over me, but over everything we built together. As I walked out of the office, whispers followed me. The staff pretended to look busy, but I felt their eyes on me, curious, judgmental, maybe even pitying. I hated pity. Down the hallway, I passed the framed photos of milestones, company launches, ribbon cuttings, award ceremonies. My own face smiled back from some of those frames, a reminder of the work I had poured into his empire. Into our empire. And now, I was nothing more than a ghost passing through its halls. When the elevator doors closed, I finally let myself breathe. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored walls, pale, hollow-eyed, but not broken. Not yet. That night, at home, the betrayal deepened. I expected silence, maybe emptiness. Instead, I found my life rearranged. My clothes were shoved into boxes in the guest room. Her perfume lingered in the bedroom. A coffee mug with her lipstick sat on the kitchen counter. It was like she had been here all along, waiting for her victory. I sat on the edge of the bed I once shared with him, and tried to process what had just happened. Fired. Replaced. Erased. But humiliation wasn't the only thing I felt. Beneath the hurt, something darker stirred. A sharp, steady flame of anger. I thought of the late nights I spent coding financial systems for the company. The long weekends I gave up to help him chase contracts. The sacrifices I made to help him climb. Every detail of his empire ran through my hands, and in the process, I had created something he never fully understood, a secret code buried in the system. He thought he fired me. He thought he erased me. But he didn't know I had left my fingerprint in his empire, hidden in plain sight. The thought brought me a strange comfort, though I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. The next morning, I decided to face him one more time, not for reconciliation, but for clarity. I needed to see him as he was now, stripped of the illusions I had once clung to. I walked into his office unannounced. Emma was seated in my old chair, flipping through papers like she'd always belonged there. My husband looked up, annoyed. "Diana, you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice flat. I met his eyes. I gave years to this company. To you. And you replace me like I'm nothing? His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Emma leaned back, smirking. Sometimes it's better to let go of the past, she said softly, her words dripping with condescension. I almost laughed. Let go of the past? The irony was rich. The past was the only thing keeping his empire standing, and I was the one who held it. I turned without another word. There was nothing left to say. But as I left the building, a calmness settled over me. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything. But they had underestimated me. Because while they were celebrating their triumph, I was already planning their downfall. And this time, I wouldn't just walk away quietly. When I closed the door behind me that day, I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt emptiness. The house I walked into no longer felt like mine. Every corner whispered betrayal. The photographs on the wall, smiling faces, vacations, anniversaries, looked like they belonged to someone else's story, not mine. The kitchen was spotless, but not in the way I left it. My favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle, was shoved behind new ones. A silk scarf I had never seen before was draped over a chair, smelling faintly of expensive perfume. I touched it, then dropped it as though it had burned me. I should have cried, but I didn't. My tears had dried up in his office. What replaced them was a hollow stillness. I moved through the rooms like a visitor in my own life, unsure where to sit, where to stand, where to breathe. That night, I lay in bed alone. The sheets still carried his cologne, mixed with something unfamiliar. I turned on my side, clutching the pillow, and for the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in the very space I had once called home. The next morning, I went out for coffee, partly because I couldn't stand to drink it in the kitchen that now carried her scent. The barista, a young girl with bright eyes, smiled at me. Good morning, Diana. Usual? I froze. Her voice was cheerful, but her words reminded me of something painful. Even here, in this tiny cafe I had visited for years, I wasn't just Diana, I was still his wife. People knew me as the CEO's partner, the polished woman who came in with him on Saturdays, who laughed too loudly at his jokes. Now I was none of those things. Make it a large, I said quietly, forcing a smile. She didn't notice the tremor in my voice, but I did. Every interaction, every small exchange, carried the weight of my unraveling identity. I sipped the coffee by the window and watched people rush by, lawyers, students, parents with strollers. They all looked so sure of themselves, so rooted in their lives. And I felt like I was drifting, detached, invisible. Days bled into each other. I tried to hold on to routines, but everything felt wrong. Grocery shopping reminded me of meals we once shared. Passing by the park made me think of Sunday walks that were now just lies wrapped in memories. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend, Marissa. She had been at our wedding, once my closest confidant before life and distance pulled us apart. Diana, she said, surprised. You look different. Is everything okay? I forced a smile. I'm fine. But her eyes narrowed. She could see through me. You don't look fine. Do you want to talk? For a moment, I wanted to spill everything. To tell her how I'd been fired, replaced, humiliated. To confess that my husband was parading his mistress as my successor, that my home no longer felt like mine. But the words caught in my throat. Because saying it aloud made it real. Instead, I nodded politely. I'll call you soon. We hugged, but it felt stiff, like I was pretending to be a version of myself that no longer existed. Nights were the worst. Alone in that too-big house, I started to hear things I had never noticed before: the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the stairs, the distant traffic outside. It was as though the silence wanted to swallow me whole. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the study. His study. Papers were scattered across the desk, a pen left uncapped, a glass half full. I sat down in his chair, running my hands over the wood. For years, I had respected this space as his domain. But now, sitting there, I felt a shift. This wasn't just his. It was ours. Built from my sacrifices, my work, my knowledge. And yet, here I was, treated like an intruder in my own story. The thought hit me hard. I wasn't just a stranger in my life, I had been pushed out of it, deliberately. Replaced, rewritten, erased. And that realization hurt more than anything else. The following week, I tried to reclaim small pieces of myself. I went to the farmer's market, bought fresh flowers, and placed them on the table. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, creating space that felt less haunted. I even started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto paper in messy handwriting. But no matter what I did, the ghost of betrayal lingered. Every time I passed by his office building, I imagined them inside, laughing, planning, living the life I had built. I imagined the staff looking at Emma with respect, the same respect they once gave me. And each time, the ache inside me grew sharper. It wasn't just about losing him. It was about losing me. One evening, as I sat by the window with a glass of wine, I noticed something across the street. A couple walked hand in hand, their laughter carried faintly through the night air. They looked young, carefree, untouched by betrayal. I envied them, but I also envied my past self, the woman who once believed in forever, who once felt safe in her own skin. But as I watched them, a thought settled into me. Maybe the life I lost wasn't worth holding on to. Maybe the stranger I felt now wasn't a curse, but a chance. Because if I was a stranger, it meant I didn't have to play by the old rules anymore. I could rewrite who I was. And deep inside, beneath the ache, I knew something else. My story wasn't over. I hadn't decided yet what to do, but one thing was certain: if he thought he could erase me, he was wrong. The thought that my story wasn't over clung to me like a whisper in the night. I repeated it to myself whenever the silence became unbearable, when memories tried to pull me under. But it wasn't until a few weeks later that life handed me something I never expected: her secret. It happened on a grey Thursday morning. I had gone downtown to clear my head, wandering through streets I rarely visited. The air smelled faintly of rain, and I tucked my hands into my coat pockets as I walked past shops and cafes. That's when I saw her. Emma. She stood outside a pharmacy, her hair pulled back, her phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't dressed like the polished executive I'd seen stepping into his car. Her heels were replaced with sneakers, and a loose sweater hung over her frame. I might have walked past, ignoring her, but something in her expression stopped me. Her face was pale, her voice low, her free hand gripping her stomach. She looked nervous, vulnerable. I ducked behind a parked car, my heart racing. I didn't know why I hid. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was pain. Maybe it was the strange hunger for answers, for anything that could make sense of the mess my life had become. "Yeah, I'll pick it up today," I heard her say. "No, he doesn't know. He can't know. Not yet." Her words sliced through me. He doesn't know. My husband, the man who tossed me aside for her, was being kept in the dark about something. I should have walked away. But I couldn't. That evening, I couldn't get her voice out of my head. I replayed her words over and over, pacing the kitchen until the clock struck midnight. What could she possibly be hiding from him? What could make her so desperate, so shaken, in broad daylight? The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I went back to that pharmacy. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't sit in the dark any longer. The bell over the door chimed as I stepped inside. The place smelled of antiseptic and paper packaging. I walked slowly, scanning the aisles, until I noticed the clerk behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Just browsing, thank you." But then I saw it. On the counter, waiting to be picked up, was a small white bag with a name scrawled across it in black ink. Emma Carter. My pulse quickened. I glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then leaned closer. The label on the bag was partly visible, just enough for me to make out the words prescription refill. I didn't dare touch it. Instead, I memorized the name of the medication as best I could before slipping out the door. At home, I sat at my laptop and typed the name into the search bar. The screen filled with medical terms and explanations. My breath caught as I read. The prescription was for treatment related to fertility complications. Emma wasn't just the mistress. She was a woman trying to hide a very private struggle. The discovery hit me harder than I expected. For a while, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my mind torn between pity and fury. She had stolen my husband, my life, my dignity, and yet, she was carrying a secret that could shatter the perfect image she wore in public. I wrestled with the information for days. Part of me wanted to expose her immediately, to walk into his office and let the truth bleed across his polished floor. But another part of me hesitated. This wasn't just a weapon, it was knowledge, and knowledge had power. I needed to be careful. One evening, fate threw us together again. I was leaving the grocery store when I spotted her in the parking lot, fumbling with her keys. She looked exhausted, her makeup smudged, her shoulders slumped. "Emma," I said, before I could stop myself. She turned sharply, her eyes widening when she saw me. "Diana," she muttered, stiffening. We stood there for a moment, the air thick between us. "I didn't expect to see you here," she added, her tone clipped. "Small town," I replied evenly. My eyes flicked to the bag in her hand. Prescription bag. The same kind I had seen at the pharmacy. Her grip tightened around it. She knew I had noticed. Something flickered in her gaze, fear, maybe, or anger. But she said nothing. She simply nodded once and slipped into her car, slamming the door. I watched her drive away, my heart pounding. She was hiding more than I had realized. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the scene over and over. Her pale face outside the pharmacy. Her trembling hand clutching the bag. The way she looked at me, as though I held a mirror she couldn't bear to face. The betrayal I had suffered was already unbearable, but now I held a thread that could unravel everything she had built with him. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something different. Not just grief, not just anger, but control. Over the next few days, I started to watch her more closely. Not obsessively, but carefully, quietly. I noticed the way she avoided certain places, the way she left early from his office some days, the way she glanced around nervously in public. It became clear she was living two lives, the polished mistress on his arm, and the woman battling a secret in the shadows. And though I hated her for what she had done to me, I couldn't shake the thought that she was trapped in her own kind of prison. But that didn't mean I'd spare her. Because her secret wasn't just hers anymore. It was mine, too. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I opened the laptop at midnight, the kind of midnight that felt heavier than the rest. The apartment was quiet, the city outside muted under the weight of sleep. The radiator clicked in the corner, the hum of the fridge seemed louder than usual, and for a long moment I just sat there staring at the black screen. My reflection in the glass looked tired, older somehow, but steady. The small drive lay in my bag, no bigger than my thumb, but holding years of planning. That drive carried a piece of code I had written long ago, back when I still believed in building safeguards for the company I thought was my family. Back when I still believed in him. It had been created as a routine maintenance test, something meant to simulate failures so we could practice recovery. No one thought twice about it. Nobody ever read the tiny comments I left in the margins, tucked away like little breadcrumbs only I could follow. I didn't rush. Rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes meant innocent people could get hurt. Tonight wasn't about anger or spectacle. It was about precision. It was about letting truth do the work. First, I mapped the windows in my mind like I had done hundreds of times before. Payroll closed at 1 a.m. Vendor reconciliations ran at 3 o'clock. Backups kicked in every 4 hours like clockwork. I knew these rhythms the way a pianist knows the rise and fall of a familiar piece. This time, though, the music would play differently. My plan was simple but powerful: trigger a controlled halt on the accounts that covered executive bonuses and hidden vendor pathways, then let the anomalies flag themselves for audit. That way, the rot would rise to the surface without harming the workers who depended on steady checks. I connected through a secure terminal, my hands moving with a practiced calm. The keyboard clicked under my fingertips, each keystroke like a heartbeat. My throat tightened as the screen filled with code. I typed in the command sequence I had hidden years ago under a bland, forgettable name. It passed through the system like a ghost. To anyone watching, It looked like a routine maintenance call. At first, nothing changed. That was expected. Systems are designed to bend, to absorb small shocks without flinching. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding against my ribs, and listened. The silence was deceptive, like standing in the eye of a storm. Within an hour, the first ripple appeared. A vendor ledger flagged a discrepancy, a single payment stuck, waiting for confirmation that would never come. The vendor, annoyed, sent a terse note. A junior accountant saw the flag and called IT. A tiny bump in the road, almost invisible. But that call set off a chain reaction. IT escalated it, and soon a chat thread lit up with puzzled error codes and checksum warnings. Anna, my quiet ally, slipped me updates in fragments. Unexpected loop in vendor 2143, duplicate entry flagged. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Trust doesn't always need words. Collateral damage had always been my greatest fear. When the payroll process hiccuped, my chest clenched. I couldn't risk children missing lunch money because of my plan. Without hesitation, I logged into my private account and made a transfer. Enough to cover payroll, enough to buy time. It was a strange feeling, funding a company that had cut me loose, but protecting the innocent had always mattered more than vengeance. By late afternoon, the storm had gathered. The board convened in a sterile conference room that smelled of burnt coffee and cheap carpet cleaner. Anna sent me a private link, and I watched from the shadows. My husband sat at the head of the table, his hands gripping the polished wood like it might steady him. The CFO's face was pale as she shuffled through spreadsheets riddled with gaps. Investors dialed in, voices sharp, demanding explanations for missing funds and off-book transfers. He tried to spin, to charm, to redirect. But charm has no place in a ledger. Numbers don't lie. Meanwhile, the outside world caught the scent. A financial blogger spotted the unusual delays and posted a quick alert. By noon, headlines whispered of irregularities. Reporters asked for statements. Social media picked it up, and speculation grew like wildfire. I sat in my small kitchen, laptop open, phone buzzing, watching it all unfold. It wasn't the glee I expected. It wasn't satisfaction. It was a cold, heavy clarity. This was what truth looked like: messy, slow, relentless. Small ripples turned into waves. A warehouse manager refused to release shipments without cleared payments. A local supplier called HR, voice shaking with fear. An event planner panicked over deposits gone missing. These weren't faceless numbers, they were real people. I couldn't let them become collateral either. Quietly, I made more emergency transfers, covering what I could without drawing attention. Not because I wanted recognition, but because I refused to let his mess become theirs. And then Emma panicked. Her calls to management were frantic, clipped, her voice cracking as she demanded assurances. I imagined her pacing in high heels across a marble floor, the same floor I once polished with my own ambition. But her fear wasn't about the workers or the truth unraveling. It was about her status, her position, her reflection in the eyes of others. Meanwhile, regulators sharpened their focus. Auditors requested logs, contracts, server histories. The code had done its work. It had shone a light on a hidden payment route running through a shell account, straight into a private ledger that had never appeared in official reports. That red thread now blinked like a warning flare. At 2 a.m, a young analyst messaged me in secret. Her voice shook. "Is this sabotage? Are we losing everything?" She sounded so small, so frightened. I told her to keep copies of communications, to follow HR notices, to protect herself. I lied a little too, telling her it would settle soon. She thanked me, her voice soft with relief. That mattered more than the chaos outside. Anna worked beside me in the digital shadows. She confirmed timestamps, checked logs, mirrored my findings. Together we built a folder, neat and damning, invoices duplicated, vendor codes mismatched, handwritten amendments tucked where they shouldn't be. A trail of breadcrumbs, each leading to the same conclusion. He, meanwhile, was unraveling. His calls grew desperate, his charm cracking at the edges. He promised investors quick fixes, but every fix created new questions. Auditors didn't want promises, they wanted paper. Real contracts. Authentic numbers. His empire had been built on smoke and mirrors, and the smoke was clearing. What struck me most was how fragile it all was. His entire empire had leaned on one thing: confidence. The illusion that he was in control. But once doubt crept in, confidence turned to suspicion. Every polished phrase was dissected. Every excuse picked apart. By dawn, the company's stock had dipped. After hours, trading showed red. News anchors spoke in careful tones about emerging irregularities. My stomach twisted. Exposure wasn't fireworks, it was a slow, methodical tearing down of curtains. When auditors issued their formal notice, the air shifted. They weren't asking anymore. They were demanding. Full documentation, complete server logs, every detail backdated. The message was clear: the game was over. I closed my laptop, my hands aching from hours of typing. My apartment was still, except for the low hum of the city waking up outside. I stood at the window and looked down at the dark street, the glow of street lamps fading as dawn crept in. Somewhere out there, families were waking up, checking their accounts, and finding their paychecks safe. Because of me. Because I had chosen mercy alongside justice. It didn't erase the weight in my chest, but it mattered. He would face the consequences, yes. But tonight wasn't about him anymore. It was about me reclaiming control, me choosing not to be silent, me proving to myself that I could stand up and do something when silence would have been easier. The code had changed everything, not with fire, but with truth. And truth was enough. The work of truth had begun. The code had opened a door. Now others would pass through, and justice would need more than a single script to be done right. I closed my eyes and breathed, prepared for the long days ahead. Morning arrived with small tasks that felt oddly sacred. I made coffee and watched the steam rise, mapping the day in my head. My first call was to Teresa, my lawyer, to confirm what documents we had ready. Her steady voice calmed me. She spoke in clear, practical sentences that cut through the fog. Messages kept coming. Elena, our longtime housekeeper, left a note asking if I needed help sorting things. Her loyalty had been constant through every season. I told her to wait. We would move carefully, with dignity. I did not want boxes packed in a panic. I phoned a trusted analyst, Kayla, who still worked in finance. She had been scared when payroll hiccups began. I told her to keep copies of emails and to be precise in documentation. Helping someone handle a single task felt like small reparation. It kept real people safe. Marissa arrived with soup and a soft smile. We sat and talked about everything and nothing. Her presence was a gentle reminder that life's ordinary comforts matter. There is power in being seen by someone who does not want anything in return. I refused to turn my actions into spectacle. The temptation to broadcast every wrong felt strong, but cruelty solves nothing. Instead, I made a quiet choice. I moved funds to cover one temporary payroll cycle. No announcement. No applause. Just a wire that meant one family could keep a roof over their head that week. Work pulled me back to the community center where I taught. The teens there asked practical, bright questions about data and fairness. Teaching them was a balm. It reminded me I could create tools that help people, not tools that harm. Audits and inquiries continued. Contracts leaked into daylight. Investors asked pointed questions. He gave polished answers while the house of cards creaked. The woman who had replaced me faded from public view. I did not chase that disappearance. It felt insignificant compared to the larger truth coming to light. There were tender, awkward moments. His mother called, confused and upset. I explained what had happened, carefully. She cried, and I cried with her. It was sorrow, not triumph. Human connections do not always fit the neat lines a story wants to draw. A procurement clerk named Sam came forward to HR with a trembling statement about odd vendor channels. I accompanied him to ensure his concerns were recorded. Standing in that fluorescent office, I felt resolve. Courage is small acts done when no one is watching. I returned to notebooks I had stuck away. Inside were ideas for honest tools, simple programs to help small vendors track invoices, a community platform to list verified payments. I sketched plans and made a modest outline. What I wanted now was constructive work. Packing was quiet. Elena and I wrapped things with care, keeping memory intact but not weighty. The moving truck took only essentials: books, a few cherished photographs, my chipped mug. The house would be sold. I needed no proof of the life I had lived there. My new apartment was modest: sunlight on a narrow kitchen table, a small shelf for books, basil in a pot on the sill. I learned the pleasure of making soup for one. I walked to the market and carried groceries by hand. Those ordinary tasks became a practice in building a life on my own terms. I spent hours helping small non-profits tighten spreadsheets, building a simple database that saved volunteers hours. Each small fix felt meaningful. The bakery owner who cried when a delayed deposit was fixed hugged me in gratitude. Her relief was a reminder that my skills could be used to mend, not to punish. When hearings began, I testified with facts and steady voice. I focused on consequences I had seen and processes that needed change. My words did not need theatrical anger; clarity carried power. A young paralegal later thanked me for making their work easier. Simple recognition felt profound. People reached out with apologies. Some were sincere, some awkward. I returned a few calls and let others go. I had learned to choose whom I allowed close. Setting boundaries was self-respect in action. A woman whose husband worked in logistics wrote to thank me for arranging a small transfer that bridged a week of payroll delay. Her letter was simple and full of relief. I kept it folded in my desk. It reminded me that responsible action matters more than spectacle. Weeks passed. Leadership shifted at the company. Audits tightened. He lost invitations and presence in circles that once praised him. A phone call came, his voice thin with regret. I listened once, politely, then ended the call. Forgiveness is a path I might choose someday, but not on his timetable. I gathered a small team to build the platform in my notebooks. 2 developers, a part-time project manager, and volunteers from the community center formed a modest group. We focused on transparency and tools that made payments traceable. Our first pilot helped a small vendor reconcile a missing payment in a single day. The gratitude in that owner's voice felt like proof that this work mattered. Walking away was not a dramatic leap. It was daily choices: wake up without checking headlines, cook a meal and eat it, protect my time, learn to say no. Each small decision stitched my life back into something honest. On a cool morning, Elena and I walked by the river. The air felt clean. She said, quietly, "You are easier to be around, Diana." Her words were a gift. I smiled and felt the truth of it lighter, not because the past had vanished, but because I had chosen a route forward. When the legal process quieted, and the world's attention shifted, what remained was not a trophy. It was a steady, quieter life. I had rebuilt a corner of my world on purpose. It cost me grief, and it gave me clarity. One night, holding my chipped mug, I thought of all the small choices that had led me here. I had not sought ruin. I had sought truth and repair. Walking away had meant stepping toward work I believed in, not away from a name. That choice, small and stubborn, had made me stronger. In the end, strength felt like a slow dawn rather than a single blaze. I had lost a marriage and an empire of pretense, but I had gained a life I could stand behind. With a pot of basil on the sill and a schedule filled with classes and calls to progress makers, I felt at peace. I kept learning. I learned to trust small joys, to answer the phone for people who truly needed help, to refuse the rest. Each day built a quieter confidence. My future was not sudden vindication but steady, honest work, one kind choice at a time.